What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, bringing you guys another round of talking points and topics around the NFL. To get started on today's episode, I'm going to talk about the volunteer workouts that begin today, part of phase one of the whole offseason workouts in the NFL. We got a handful of teams starting today. I'm going to talk about them and some of the stories and topics that surround them, even still after the first month of free agency. Then I'm going to get into the new developing technology being used in the UFL on how to measure first downs. I looked into it and it looks very modernized and very interesting, something that the NFL might want to look into maybe for this season or further down the line. I'm going to break all of that down to you. And towards the end of the show, I'm going to be talking about what Fox Sports 1's Emmanuel Acho said on his show, Speak, on Justin Fields, and how he called him a game loser. Broke it down into three categories: game changer, game manager, and game loser. He fell in the latter category, and I'm going to talk about what my thoughts are on that and what he specifically said about Justin Fields and him going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. All of that coming up on today's show. Please remember to follow, like, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, as well as the GSMC Sports Network and Podcast Network as well. Before I jump into the first segment, I want to remind you guys, first, to start off the show, if you have any questions or comments during this live show, to please use the tip and donations link on your screen and running across the ticker at GSMCPodcast.net. This makes sure your questions pop up right away in my chat box. I'm able to read it on air, answer your questions, or just react to a comment. It makes it more engaging, more fun, and it's a big help for this show as well as the network as a whole. So again, the tip and donations link is GSMCPodcast.net. A big thank you to you guys if you're able to do that with any of your questions or comments. But in saying that, I can start with the first topic, the offseason workout starting today for three teams: the Washington Commanders, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Atlanta Falcons. It's part of the first phase of the whole offseason workouts. This first phase is part of the NFL CBA, Article 21 of that CBA. It's only supposed to be really strength and conditioning testing right now for some of these teams until you get into OTAs and minicamp and all that other stuff. So teams aren't really supposed to go full out right now. It's really just a starting point to see where these teams' players are and just to get acclimated with everything again. The teams that are starting today, like I mentioned, the Chargers, the Commanders, and the Falcons are starting today, and then there's going to be a few more teams starting next week on April 8th, followed up by the majority of all the other teams starting on April 15th. So these three teams get a new start or an earlier start to some of the other ones, and I think it's warranted just because if you look at the teams and talking about some of their talking points and topics, just rounding off the first month of free agency and where they kind of stand now, they've answered a good amount of questions, but there still remains some interesting talking points around each of their situations heading in to the draft. We're in draft month now. Things are going to start to pick up. So I thought I'd recap it and talk about it here, starting with the Atlanta Falcons. Everybody knows how the biggest thing about them, Kirk Cousins, they're bringing in Raheem Morris as their new head coach, Zach Robinson as their new offensive coordinator. His first time being the offensive coordinator was the pass game coordinator with the Rams, and it is similar, but there are some little nuances to each position. So he's going to be the first time offensive coordinator for the Falcons. That's part of it, part of what you're looking to now. You have sort of your offense structured already and kind of built out how you wanted it to, how you envisioned it. You got Kirk Cousins in there. You've had the weapons already. The offensive line is very good. Now you can start to play with it a little bit, start to develop those plans at how this is all going to look. But that still remains a talking point with the Falcons. New head coach, new offensive coordinator. It's exciting, but how is it all going to play out and develop? Raheem Morris is more of a defensive-minded coach. I'm sure he'll give his input more on the defensive side of the ball than offense, which gives Zach Robinson more command, which could be good, but also that inexperience. He's never really done the whole offensive coordinator job before. To the extent that we know, we don't know how much he was involved with Mike LaFleur at the Los Angeles Rams and how much Sean McVay gave him control. So that's something to watch. And Kirk Cousins is rehab. He's not going to be part of any conditioning strength test right now, but he had it before he signed with the Falcons. He had it as a goal to return by OTAs, and that's already a month away. And he was already ahead of schedule. I'm sure everyone saw those videos of him on social media throwing at the tennis courts, looking pretty well. But, it's two different things, just throwing out there, really nobody watching too much, and going out there on the field, maybe moving more game-like a little bit more than you do on your own. Watching how his rehab goes, and if he continues on this pace, how early he can come back and how good he looks in OTAs if he's able to make it there on time like he wanted it to. And the biggest thing about the Falcons, how do they address the defense going forward? The offense looks great. That was the biggest problem, quarterback and not putting up enough points, not providing all the potential for this offense with all the young talent that they have. But on defense, they don't have Bud Dupree anymore. Calais Campbell's not there. Arguably their two best pass rushers, at least Bud Dupree was definitely one of them. They're now gone, and you're looking around now to see who's going to step up, if they're going to do anything else in free agency. The draft is still coming in about over 3 weeks now. That's something I assume they're going to attack during the NFL draft, but they're going to need a few more pieces than just one pass rusher. This is a project that they want to develop on. So that's another thing to monitor, seeing how their defense comes together and how they start putting pieces together to try and put out their best product. But overall, it's more good than bad with the Atlanta Falcons, so excited to see them. The other team is the Washington Commanders. Similarly to the Atlanta Falcons, Dan Quinn returning to head coaching with the Washington Commanders after being the defensive coordinator with the Dallas Cowboys. Goes heavy on the defensive side of the ball, like you would imagine, signing a bunch of players to revamp that defense. A lot of former Cowboys coming over as well. I like the additions a lot. I mentioned it before on one of these shows. The Commanders were up there with one of the best off seasons that I saw, in my opinion, with how different their team's going to look with new pieces and finding the depth that they needed, quite honestly, through all these players that came in. So that's good, but they just need the biggest players now, right? The most significant pieces of the whole puzzle. The quarterback, which everyone assumes they're going to address at the number 2 pick, but it is something still to monitor. If they draft the guy, you have to assume that's the right person to take on this whole project that the Commanders have going now with Dan Quinn, their new general manager, Adam Peters. A lot of freshness coming into the Commanders. If they draft the right guy, in their estimation, how that all plays out and if he's ready to assume all this responsibility. But drafting at number 2, that's a lot of talent, a very good quarterback, so that could end up playing well, as well as edge rusher. In my opinion, the other biggest need that you need to have on a contending team. They lost Montez Sweat. They still have Jonathan Allen there. So, you have somebody in the middle of that defensive line to be stout, run defender, pass rusher when he needs to be. But you need someone on those edges as well. They have options there, through their draft as well. You have other free agent options out there. Jadeveon Clowney was just taken off the market, so I don't know how much better you think you're going to get in free agency. So that's something else to see if they try to make a move, maybe make a trade for somebody on the trading block. Not too many things to worry about, but the more significant, it's more quality over quantity with the Commanders right now because they added a lot of quantity in the offseason, in free agency. And lastly, with the Los Angeles Chargers, a new era being brought in under Jim Harbaugh, making a lot of radical changes right away, cutting Mike Williams, trading Keenan Allen, keeping Bosa and Khalil Mack, which I think is a positive for them. Regardless of who he kept, it was going to sting, but you're still fortunate enough to keep at least 2 or one of those pieces They were able to keep both of them, and now I'm assuming now everybody knows how Jim Harbaugh is. If you haven't seen Michigan or his past 49ers teams, he's very tough team, physical, in the trenches, defensive line, offensive line, maulers on that offensive line. He wants to beat you up really and control the game that way, which is why I assume he got rid of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, saw them as more expendable than Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. But even outside of those pieces, great pass rushers, like I just mentioned, you need that on a contending team. But where does this leave Justin Herbert? What's he thinking? Is he worried right now, could you say, about who's he going to throw the ball to? All of his main targets pretty much are gone or are free agents right now. The offensive line is all right, but that's another area where they could attack in the draft at number 5. They could get one of the best receivers at number 5. It's all really going to be a big determinant, I think, of what they do with that 5 pick. If they trade back, that's a win-win, I think, for everybody. They get more capital that way, probably address other positions, more positions than they thought. But if they go receiver, you could understand it. Somebody needs to catch a pass from Justin Herbert. Or if they go offensive line, I think it would be more surprising and more telling of what kind of team Jim Harbaugh wants to run, and really him trying to build his identity and how he morphs this team into what I think is going to look a lot like Michigan. Hopefully, they get to be as successful as Michigan were this past season. But it's definitely going to take a while, because I think out of both of the teams, the Falcons and the Commanders, they're the furthest back just because they have the franchise quarterback. No real questions around Justin Herbert, but it's all the pieces around them that I've mentioned with Justin Fields and any other rookie quarterbacks and just quarterbacks in general. They need to have a lot of help around them to be successful and really determine where they are talent-wise. You already know Justin Herbert is one of the most talented quarterbacks in the NFL. You just have to build it all up around him. They've had salary cap issues, so that's kind of hindered them a little bit. But this is going to take a while, and with them being in a tough division, not to mention the AFC West and how that all plays out, there's going to be a few bumps in the road. But like all these 3 teams, like I mentioned, there's excitement there, there's questions, but I think right now all 3 of these fan bases and people looking at them would definitely feel a lot better than where they were before this free agent period started. All these questions that they needed to address, I think they've addressed them and blown the expectations out of the water where they are right now. And now with these offseason workouts starting today, they can start to develop that and seeing that go into OTAs once the draft is over, how that further develops in this team dynamic and how they just build out the rest of the roster. It's going to be very fascinating with all 3 basically new head coaches, all 3 haven't coached in a while, seeing how that dynamic plays out and who gets into a groove faster, how it all plays out like that. Very fascinating stuff, very interesting for me and all of us to keep track on going forward. But in the meantime, we're going to move on with the show and leave that there. There's a lot more to talk about on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. After the break, I'm going to be getting into the Vikings' reported interest now in Drake May. It all seemed to be around J.J. McCarthy, but recent reports suggest that the Vikings and their head coach Kevin O'Connell were left pretty impressed with what they saw out of Drake May at his UNC Pro Day. More on that and what that could mean for them if they go Drake May over J.J. McCarthy. I'm going to give you my thoughts right after this break, so don't go anywhere. A lot more to come right after this.